Well, hello everyone. It's now time to find out who the top corners were in the NFL this week. So, tied for number one was four corners. Um, Two of them have been on this list. Number one is from New Orleans. His name is Yadam. He has 7 passes deflected and 1 interception. Number two, who's new, is Wallace from the Pittsburgh Steelers. He had 7 pass deflections and 2 interceptions. Number three, coming from the game in the good old Bailey in London, was Williams from Jacksonville. He had 7 pass deflections, 2 interceptions, and he had a total of 61 yards from those interceptions. And then also is Taylor from New Orleans, who also had 7 pass deflections. One thing that I noticed when I was going through these numbers and everything is that in the top 10, 6 of the top 10 corners were new this week. There's Douglas from Green Bay. There's Peterson also from Pittsburgh. Lattimore, New Orleans is in there. Espinoza, I know I probably butchered his name, from Buffalo is in there. Blankenship from Philadelphia is in there. And to go back to Espinoza at Baltimore, he had a 32-yard return on his interception that he had. And then my favorite person in the world, as everybody who knows me knows, Pat Surtain too, finally hit the top 10. So all those guys that I noted as in the bottom, tied for 5, they all had 6 passes deflected and they had 1 interception this week. So, but I decided to get a little different kind of flavor for you guys. I wanted to look and see like who was doing well with TDs or what they ran back. So when I look for who got TDs instead of just like pass deflections, Witherspoon from Seattle comes in first with 4 pass deflections and interception, and he had a total of 97 yards. Then a Dallas guy that was on this list has talked about before. His name is Bland. He had 5 pass deflections, 3 interceptions for a total of 86 yards. So those are the top corners in today's NFL. Now, I'm going to get to the second part. And as you can see in what it says, we're going to talk about ownership. And I kind of alluded to this last week in my segment. So we're going to go over some basic rules for ownership of an NFL team. Okay. I'm going to make these kind of quick. I'm not going to get into the nitty gritty because that'll take way too long, but there's some no-nos. One is you can't be a casino owner or have an ownership in any kind of casino, which we already know from the number of discussions we've had on gambling in the NFL. We can understand why that rule's there. 2, no private equity, no public companies, and no sovereign wealth groups. And we're going to remember the private equity part because we're going to refer back to that later in what I'm talking about. Sovereign wealth groups means any money you have in an international fund, that it's global money, you're investing all over the world and stuff like that. You can't use that money. Can't use money that you have made in a foreign investment to be in for a team. You can't have more than 25 people in the group or in a part of your group. That's your ownership. You can't have any cross ownership with other leagues that are in your market. So the biggest example I can say about this one is Sam Greinke owned the Colorado. He owned the Avalanche and he also owned the Nuggets. So when his family bought the Rams in 2010, he had to diversify his interest in the Avalanche and the Nuggets and give it to his son, and his son now owns those. An exception, people kind of point this one out. The exception to this is Paul Allen, who owned the Seahawks. He also owned the Portland Trail Blazers. But the reason he was able to do that was because, one, there wasn't an NFL team in Portland, and 2, the NFL considered Portland and Seattle to kind of be the same market. So that's why he was able to do this. Now, some people may remember, and Sean probably doesn't remembers this, Jared Harris, who is the primary buyer of the Commanders. When he bought the Commanders, he had to look for someone to buy his minority interest that he had in the Steelers. And that's because he can't own another team. The whole idea of this is they don't want owners to be competing against each other in markets, because it's going to take money away from the other. They're going to be competing for the same pile of money, and they don't want that to happen. Okay, so in order to do this, you need a minimum 30% stake in the overall price, and you can't borrow more than $1 billion overall as the group and to put your money up. So I'm going to use numbers I know, because I know these guys the best. So back when the Broncos were sold to the Walton Penner Group, the total overall price was $4.65 billion. So it was the highest amount paid. The Commanders have now topped that. But 30% of that price is $1.4 billion. So that's the cash you have to come up with for these teams. So if you split it, even if it's 25, 25, 25, which there was 4 main buyers of the Broncos, you're bringing in about $1 billion a piece each. But again, you can only finance the overall team up to $1 billion. So that group had to bring in $3.65 billion in cash, which, if anyone knows anything about Haslam and his ownership of the Browns, his other companies are having some financial difficulties. And a lot of people think it's because he borrowed from Peter to pay Paul so that he could come up with the cash. So some of this is coming up. Again, like the amount that these teams are valued at is increasing heavily. It's getting higher and higher and higher, but they're finding a smaller and smaller market for people to buy these teams, so that people who buy them could get their investment out and sell it to somebody else. And everybody sees this happening, but when you have to come up with essentially 75% of your cost in cash, it reduces your pool very quickly. So the NFL put a committee together, and they had their first meeting on September 26th. And the point of that meeting is for them to come up with ideas as to what they can recommend to the owners at the ownership meeting in March of 2024. And the idea is going to be, what can we do to make it easier to sell the teams, to get investments? What are some various things that we can do? Now, that committee is made up, and I had to laugh because it's the same people all over again, but it's kind of funny. So Atlanta, blank, the president, it's all the presidents from Atlanta, the Patriots, the Chiefs, the Browns, and the Broncos. And the reason why I kind of laugh about that is the Broncos and the Browns are the 2 teams that have most recently had to go through this. So they're going to be able to give probably a better understanding of what the current situations are for how you come up with money for this. So the ideas that are being tossed around is they'll allow higher debt limits. Like you can only, maybe they'll change it and say, okay, you can finance 50% of your company. So if it's worth $6 billion, you can finance up to $3 billion. Another thing is to raise the ceiling on the number of people that you can be allowed to have an ownership stake in the group. So it wouldn't be capped at 25. It would be capped at a different number. The other one that is being tossed around is they might lower the 30% threshold, so that the major managing partner doesn't have to own 30% or more of the company. Those are ideas that are being passed around. Now, another thing that's being passed around is changing the rule on not allowing private equity firms. Private equity, the reason why this is going to be interesting, these are your mutual funds, these are your pension plans, these are various investment ideas that people use to invest their money in other things. And the reason they're used is because you can put a lot of money together with a number of people. and they have a large pool. Like if you think about it, like Chicago teachers, how much money is in that pension fund? Like it can be millions to billions depending on what it is. So the idea is going to be that if they open it up to allow private equity groups to finance or invest in these ownership groups, it opens up a bigger pool of money for them. They may not necessarily need to take bonds, et cetera, these things. The reason that becomes interesting is because these private equity firms are also the ones that generally run mutual funds and electronic stock exchanges that everyone can invest in. So that's how it could possibly open up to people having a stake in a team. What I think will happen first is the private equity will be used to finance the ownership stake. Give it about 5, 10, 15 years, because we all know how slow the NFL works. Then they might start opening it up to allowing fans to maybe buy in. Like, let's say that the Bears, McCaskies, have decided they want to raise $20 million or whatever they need for whatever reason they decide. They could put that out on the market. Fans could buy a share in that. But again, like Green Bay, they wouldn't actually own a portion of the team. They own a stake in the ownership of the team. And those would also be subject to a lot of the same rules the Packers have. No voting rights, you don't get season tickets, etc. So that's the ownership. Really what it comes down to is, we've said time and time again with the owners, a lot of this is about them making money, and some of them see these as investments. They don't want to hold on to them like the McCaskies have, or the Roonies, or the Maras. It's not a family business to them. It's a business. So you want to buy low, sell high. So that's it. Ownership.